Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the LSU Sports Insider Postgame Show. I'm Zach Ewing, joined by Reed Darcy, live from the press box there at Tiger Stadium. The LSU Tigers finished their season with a resounding 37-17 victory over the Oklahoma Sooners. So, kind of an up and down, trying season at times, but it certainly ends on a good note. Reed, it didn't seem like it was the most boisterous crowd of the season, but they went home happy. And LSU kind of, I don't know how positive you can be. We'll talk about this as we go on, but for tonight, certainly it was a good night. LSU showed what it can be.
Yeah, Zach, and you had the right idea staying home for this one. It was pretty chilly up there, especially in the press box. They got, the wind really swirls around it and go upstairs. So yeah, it was the crowd. It got loud at times, but it certainly wasn't as large and wasn't as loud as it would have been had LSU had a better season up until this point. But it was probably, when you think about it, zooming out, it was probably one of their most complete games of the season so far. Given how they played, from the first quarter to the fourth quarter, I thought the offense looked explosive. I thought LSU ran the ball well when it needed to run the ball. And Garrett Nussmeier, we will talk about him. I think he's the main takeaway. That injury in the second quarter, in the first half, it looked really bad. And it looked like it might have not been able to knock him out of the game, but he comes back. He had to be dealing with some pain, and he played really well all night, and he really led LSU's offense. He was really good after the injury, and so I thought it was a super impressive performance on him, something he can build upon going into the offseason, and then see maybe if he wants to come back or not next year.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And we'll talk more about Nuss here in just a second. Want to let everyone know first that the LSU Sports Insider postgame show is brought to you by Waste Pro. Tiger fans, if you're planning a tailgate or event, keep your guests comfortable with portable toilets from Waste Pro. Call 225-744-6400 and mention the LSU Sports Insider for a special offer. You mentioned it, Reed, and this is obviously, I think, the story of the night. Really, probably, I guess you could say the comeback against Ole Miss for the last, half a quarter and overtime. But really, for start to finish, this game was Garrett Nussmeier's finest hour as an LSU Tiger. He played really well. He had the shoulder injury where, as you mentioned, it looked like he was not. I mean, you see a lot of guys go out there and they take the pads off and stuff. Like, he's not coming back. And he came back, like, not quite Willis Reed style because it was still early in the game, but he comes back and really plays well. Threw for 277 yards. He had 3 touchdowns. He was 22 of 31. 2 of the 3 touchdowns came after the injury, both long ones to Chris Hilton, who we've been kind of also waiting for the breakout from. So it's just good to see. I mean, and it felt like, correct me if I'm wrong, Reed, but it felt like he came out more aggressive when he came back from the injury. He said, "Screw it, I'm going to play. This is my last home game of the year. I'm going to let loose."
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that exactly because I got some numbers for you. Nuss, he went overall. He was 22 of 31 for 277 yards and 3 touchdowns. It was the first time all season he had 3 passes longer than 40 yards. Before today, he had there's a game where he had 2 40-yard completions in one game. That was against A&M, but he never had 3. And so after his injury, right when he came back. So he re-enters game in the second quarter, and he goes out and completes 10 straight passes right after he re-enters the game. And so after the injury, going from that second quarter when he got back into the rest of the game, he completed 12 of the 16 passes for 190 yards and 2 touchdowns. And those 2 touchdowns were the long, really beautifully thrown balls to Chris Hilton, right? And so I think, he felt. It felt like he was confident. It felt like he was loose. It felt like, I'm just going to let this thing fly because I really don't have much to lose anymore, right? Because the season's pretty much over and we're just trying to get a win. So, yeah, I thought he was absolutely aggressive and absolutely confident. And when you see plays like that, when defenders sort of crash into a quarterback and like put their body weight on them and drive them into the ground like the Oklahoma defensive lineman did, and the quarterback lands on his shoulder, like you're thinking broken collarbone, you're thinking dislocated shoulder, you're thinking the worst because that's sometimes what happens, unfortunately, in plays like that. But I assumed that the X-rays he went got in the locker room were negative, and he was able to come back, and he looked really sharp. It was really impressive to see how he came back from that.
Yeah, no doubt. Kevin says he showed mental and physical toughness with his. I don't know if he changed recruits' minds, Kevin, but I will say this. And by the way, you can feel free to leave your comments on Facebook or YouTube as well, and we'll show them live on the air here on the postgame show. But I don't know about recruits' minds, Reed, but I do think he probably eased some LSU fans' minds and coaches' minds about what quarterback looks like next year if he decides to come back. I mean, we've got a long way to go in that discussion, but if Garrett Nussmeier decides to come back, he's going to come back as like, I don't know, first or second team all SEC preseason quarterback, I would think. I mean, he's put up some numbers. He's going to be one of the more experienced quarterbacks in the league, and that's a spot that LSU can look at as a strength, I think, if he comes back.
And he showed some really impressive flashes all throughout the season, tonight being one of them, probably his best game, his most complete game. But you want to see him clean up the turnovers, right? He had a lost fumble tonight. He's fumbled the ball 4 times, thrown 11 interceptions this season. That's a little too much for a starting caliber quarterback of a playoff contending team. I think if he's going to decide between the draft and coming back, I don't think it's an easy decision. I think you have to factor in a number of different things here. But if he does come back, if he has another off season in this system to sort of sharpen his skills as a quarterback, I think maybe next year, in an ideal situation, you look at him and say, okay, can he cut back on the turnovers? Can he be a little more efficient with his passes? Can he go to the middle of the field a little more often? Can he maybe escape the pocket and use his legs more often? Can he just be a more refined quarterback? I think if you're an LSU fan, that's the hope you have going into a potential second year as a starter for Garrett Nussmeier. And it's easy to think about, Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels and use those comparisons of what they did in their second years as a starter at LSU. That's a little bit unfair for Garrett, but you see it in these flashes that he has, right? All his deep ball accuracy, his intermediate accuracy. He has some really impressive throws. So that's what his ceiling is. Now he just has to be more consistent as a passer.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's a long discussion to be had there over the next 6 weeks before he's got to either declare for the draft or decide to come back to LSU in mid-January, and then if he decides not to, then it all becomes okay. Well, who's LSU hitting in the transfer portal? And I do wonder if they go to Garrett and ask him pretty early in the offseason and say, hey, what are you thinking? And that may color how they spend their NIL dollars, what they do in the portal. I mean, you can't force him into a decision, but certainly if he wants to help the program, making that decision earlier rather than later probably helps them. So we'll see. We'll see, but there's plenty of time for that discussion. Let's focus in on tonight's game as you're watching the LSU Sports Insider postgame show. LSU defeats Oklahoma 37-17. Garrett Nussmeier, the 277 yards and 3 touchdowns. The first one came early on, about halfway through the first quarter, an 18-yard touchdown pass from Nussmeier to Kyron Lacey. That made it 7-0. Then things get squirrely for the Tigers for really a full quarter. Mason Thomas returns a fumble by Nussmeier for a touchdown to tie the game. So things were not going well for Nuss between that and the injury. Damian Ramos does kick a field goal to give LSU a 10-7 lead. But then Xavier Robinson runs for a touchdown for Oklahoma, and it's 14-10 midway through the second quarter. Nussmeier's hurt. We don't know what's going on. I mean, this thing really could have gone sour in a hurry. And then to me, a really big play, maybe the play of the game. We can call Nussmeier the player of the game, but the play of the game is probably Aaron Anderson's 100-yard kickoff return for a touchdown right back at Oklahoma, retake the lead. Nussmeier comes back, and all of a sudden, this game was like LSU was on like blowout watch by early third quarter after trailing midway through the second quarter. So I don't think you can understate the importance of that kickoff return.
No, you absolutely cannot. It really all turned on that one play. Keep in mind, Aaron Anderson was only in on that kickoff return. He was only the primary returner because Xavier Thomas has sort of battled a small little injury he suffered in the first half. He eventually returned to the game. It was nothing fine, but Aaron Anderson got that opportunity to score that kickoff return touchdown. It was LSU's first kickoff return touchdown in a game since 2020 when Trey Palmer ran one back against South Carolina. It was one of, I believe, if I'm getting the stat right, it's Credit to LSU Sports Information for putting this out. The fourth time in LSU program history that they've had a kickoff return touchdown of at least 100 yards. So that's impressive there. Yeah, it really turned on that one kickoff return, that one play by Aaron Anderson. He sort of bobbed and weaved through the Oklahoma kickoff coverage unit, and then sprinted up the left sideline and got a couple key blocks and ran it in. That's one of, it's not an offensive explosive play that we were looking for, but that's the kind of long, explosive, momentum shifting, game changing plays that's kind of been missing from this LSU team all season. And then we saw a couple more of those later on when Nussmeier found Chris Hilton for the touchdowns. But it's like those big plays, those long touchdown plays that's really been missing. I think that's what LSU found tonight. It was too little, too late, but you finally saw them sort of get that part of their offense going.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And speaking of explosive plays on offense, Oklahoma did retie the game at 17 on a Zach Schmidt field goal with 2:13 left in the half. And with that amount of time, you kind of think, okay, maybe LSU can get in position for another Ramos field goal and take the lead going into the locker room. But they did them one better, and that was Nussmeier to Chris Hilton for the first time, a 40-yard touchdown pass with 45 seconds left in the half. So if it wasn't the Anderson kickoff return, that's the one that really changes this game, I think. Then he hits him again for a 45-yard touchdown in the third quarter, Reed, to make it 31-17. And then I think you got to give it a lot of credit to the defense at that point. They get the interception. They really shut down the passing game from start to finish. Jackson Arnold has struggled. Oklahoma has struggled in the passing game all year long. But, holding them to 110 yards is no small feat passing and getting the takeaway as well. So I think now Oklahoma still ran pretty well tonight, 156 yards, but you hold them to 266 total yards, 4.6 yards per play, 4 of 12 combined on third and fourth down. Hey, listen, with the kind of offense LSU can play, that you will take that 8 days a week if you're the LSU defense.
Yeah, you absolutely will. And real quick on Chris Hilton, I mean, we've been talking about him all season, and we were talking about him in preseason camp. He looked really good in preseason camp. He was making plays as in LSU's first team offense, and then you thought that he could carry that over into the regular season, and he would sort of bring this vertical element to the LSU offense. And then he has the weird injury where is it a bone bruise? Is it a stress fracture? We're not really quite sure. They ultimately say it was a stress fracture, and he misses such a large chunk of the season with it. And then once he gets back, he's out of rhythm. It takes some time to really get back on the same page with Garrett Nussmeier, right? And then was it against A&M where no, it was against Florida where Brian Kelly was caught yelling at him about timing his jumps and all of that. And what did you see tonight? He timed up his jump perfectly on that first touchdown grab. It was a back shoulder throw, really tough grab in tight one-on-one coverage, and he did a great job spinning, timing his jump, and then securing the catch with the defender right on him. So shout out to Chris Hilton. I think it was good to see him finally get that breakout game that we thought we would have seen from him more often this season, because if LSU had him, healthy, in rhythm, in sync with Nussmeier all season, and if it could have that vertical element, then maybe this season would have gone a little bit differently. So it's good to see him. But yeah, Zach, I like what you mentioned about the defense, because I think that's one kind of surprise for me is how they played. They were disruptive, and I think they did a pretty good job, all things considered, against the Oklahoma rushing offense, particularly against Jackson Arnold.
Yeah, and it's after the two touchdown catches by Chris Hilton, who we just found out Brian Kelly said in the post-game press conference, Chris Hilton got the game ball tonight, so he's well-deserved there. And then after that, it's 31-17. Oklahoma's really their last chance to get back in this thing. They were driving inside the LSU 40 and try a trick play, and it was really Ashton Stamps who got back there and broke that thing up and was about to get the sack on the halfback pass. And instead, I'm trying to think of the Oklahoma. Bauer Sharp is the name of the Oklahoma back who was trying to throw that, and he just threw it up in the air. And Sage Ryan, just playing center field, caught that thing, and all of a sudden LSU's got the ball back. They go down, get a field goal early fourth quarter, and that's pretty much all she wrote. Celebration time was on in Tiger Stadium.
Yeah, and Whit Weeks, we should highlight him. He had 15 tackles. Devon Keys, the freshman, he had 10 tackles. Pretty impressive performance by him. He's been
Yeah.
getting a lot more snaps recently, just in the last month of the season. When LSU has sort of gone back to that 4-3 base defense, so he played really well tonight. He was all over the field. I think we could also say that Dominic McKinley, the freshman, he had 2 sacks tonight. Brian Kelly said post game that he was unblockable, I believe, so that's a good sign for him. LSU's most highly rated recruit that they signed the last cycle. Yeah, Brian Kelly said he was not blockable tonight post game, so that was an encouraging performance by him. And I think overall the defense it just fit the run better. You worried beforehand how LSU would defend the quarterback run, given how they did against Marcel Reed and Jalen Milroe. And Jackson Arnold, he had a solid game. Like he rushed 17 times for 75 yards, but he never really broke that long run that we've seen LSU give up throughout this season. His longest run was a 28-yarder. He averaged 4.4 yards rushing per carry. That's really it. You let him get loose maybe once or twice, but you never let him just give you a backbreaker, right? And I think LSU fit the run a lot better tonight. It set the edge a lot better. It was in his gaps. It played a more disciplined, more fundamentally sound game of rushing defense, and I think that's one of the reasons why it won by such a large margin.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And those two guys you mentioned, the two freshmen, Devon Keys and Dominic McKinley, combined for 3 sacks. Whit Weeks had the other one, so 4 sacks um, for the LSU defense. Just 10 tackles for loss. I mean, that's the kind of thing you want. Oklahoma, their offensive line has struggled. They have injuries. They're not deep. All that sort of stuff. And so you love to see that. Janice is just joining. She says the final score 37-17 Tigers was our final score. LSU finishes 8-4. So let's kind of move into a bigger picture thing, Reed. I mean, obviously it's nice to win your last 2 games, your 2 home games. As LSU said before, 8-4 is certainly better than 6-6. Will Campbell said that if they're going to play a game, I'm going to try to win it. And LSU wins the last 2. So you feel a lot better. It still stings a little bit, I'm sure, to miss out on the playoff and not be in the playoff discussion, particularly given all the chaos that's unfolded in college football the last couple of weeks, where you just look back and you say, man, if LSU had just, say, taken care of business in Gainesville and they're 9-3 right now, I don't know if they're in the playoff, but there's at least a pathway where you're going, well, maybe the committee views it this way, and maybe they're one of the 6 teams looking at the last 2 spots. And, like Alabama at 9-3 is in that situation. LSU at 9-3 certainly could be in that situation. Ole Miss at 9-3 is in that situation. LSU beat Ole Miss. So there's a little bit of a what if. But having said that, wins are better than losses. And as you said at the top, this was a complete performance and certainly a good sign for LSU's future as a program.
Things were really dire after that Florida loss, right? You lose to Florida, and then you look at Vanderbilt and Oklahoma, and you look at Vanderbilt, and you're saying, okay, Vanderbilt's a really solid team. Their resume overall probably isn't. It's right on par with LSU, so you could totally see that LSU losing that game to Vanderbilt is totally plausible, especially given the way that Vanderbilt's offense was structured. Right, it was designed in the perfect way to sort of manipulate LSU's defense and exploit it. And LSU did a good job, last week against Vanderbilt. And so I think after that loss to Florida, it's first time Brian Kelly team at LSU had lost 3 straight games. It was the first time LSU as a program had lost 3 straight games since he did it early on in Ed Orgeron's tenure. Things could have fallen apart after that, right? The players could have sort of given up. They could have mailed in the last 2 weeks of the season, and they could have just let it ride, right, over the last 2 weeks and then see what happens. And maybe you split those games. Maybe you lose both of them, right? It would have been easy to sort of let your guard down and just let the season just sputter out. Thank you. So I just think that the coaching staff, the leaders on this team, Garrett Nussmeier, Will Campbell, Greg Penn, Josh Williams, they did a good job of keeping guys together, keeping the team together, and keeping them motivated and sharp in these last 2 games. Because, like you mentioned, there's a huge difference, a massive difference between 8-4 and 6-6. Imagine if you go on 6-6 or 7-7 or 7-5 with this team. I think just the taste in your mouth as an LSU fan would have been a lot different had LSU not won these last two games and won them the way they did, especially tonight. When you win so handily, so quickly, and you put up 37 points on a team that hadn't given up more than 35 all year, and given the way that Garrett Nussmeier played, that Chris Hilton played, that your running game worked, I think it just, it gives you some positive momentum going into that bowl game and going into the offseason, because you really need that. Because earlier in the season, 3 weeks ago, things looked pretty dire. Now they have a little more hope.
Yeah, looking around the SEC tonight, Texas just stopped Texas A&M on a fourth down stand right at the goal line. And so it looks like they're going to win that game. Texas is up 17-7 with the ball and about 4 minutes left. So if they hold on, it might be the first weekend all year, Reed, where there wasn't an upset in SEC football. Like it's South Carolina beat Clemson. I think Clemson was favored in that game. So that was a small upset, but that's it. Everywhere else, the favorites, some close games in there, but the favorites hung on to win in all cases. And so nothing really changes in the SEC, in the college football playoff picture. What about the bowl projections for LSU? Any idea where they may be headed to? It's obviously still championship week to come, and anything at this point is still speculation. But does it look like another Florida game to you? Do you think Music City or Las Vegas? Maybe start the season, end the season in Las Vegas. Any ideas or guesses on where the Tigers may be headed?
If you give me a sec to look it up, I can look up some bowl projections. But I think they're in the range of Gator Bowl, Texas Bowl, Music City Bowl, those kinds of things. Maybe they play a middle of the pack team from the Big Ten. I'm not sure. But if you look at the SEC standings, it'll be, assuming Texas holds on here, it'll be Texas and Georgia in the SEC title game. Winner that gets first round bye. Loser is probably still in the playoff. And then you got Tennessee right on their heels. They won today with Vanderbilt. They'll probably be in. And then I think the committee is going to have to decide, between 3-loss Alabama team, 3-loss A&M team. Yeah, that's right. 3-loss A&M, 4-loss A&M.
3-loss Ole Miss.
Yeah, 3-loss Ole Miss, 3-loss Bama. A&M is probably out at 4 losses. It's going to be minimum 3 SEC teams in the playoff, maybe 4. I think they're going to have to decide between, some of those Big Ten teams like in Indiana. And just see how the championship week plays out. So that's what the SEC field's looking at. Even if LSU had beaten Florida, I don't think they would get in. It's probably a big ask for them.
Yeah, I think speaking of the playoff, if we let these teams in, and we're assuming Texas is going to hang on here, but Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, the 3 you mentioned from the SEC, they're going to be in. I think there's going to be 4 from the Big Ten: Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, and Indiana. And then you have a Big 12 champion, a Group of 5 champion. So now we're up to 9 teams. Notre Dame, that's 10. And then an ACC champion makes 11. So the 12th spot will go to, if we assume those 11 teams are all in no matter what happens next week, your 12th spot is either going to be Alabama, Ole Miss, or if Clemson were to beat SMU in the ACC title game, then SMU at 11-2, they're in that conversation. Miami lost today, but at 10-2, maybe they're in that conversation. And maybe even South Carolina at 9-3 is on the outside of that conversation. So you're looking at about 5 teams for that last spot.
South Carolina's got a pretty good resume. They have 3 losses, but they were real close to beating LSU. Their quarterback was hurt in that game. They were inches away from beating Alabama. That was a really close game. They did lose pretty handily to Ole Miss, but if you want to look at their resume, that's really the only mark on it. The only negative mark on it. I think they've got a really strong resume, and beating Clemson today was huge for them. They'll probably still be left out, but I think they've got a puncher's chance at it if things break right. We should probably talk about Ohio State. If you want a little bit, Big Ten, they lost today to Michigan, to one of the worst Michigan teams in the last decade. It's 4 straight losses to Michigan. So if things break kind of weird in the Big Ten, maybe they might be looking outside the playoff. If they, I think it'll be, God, all these scenarios are just completely out of my head now, because I've turned my attention to basketball season now, and I haven't had to pay too much attention to these things once LSU got out of it. So in the Big Ten, I'm assuming it's Oregon and Penn State, Ohio State and Indiana. Is Oregon and Penn State going to be in the conference title game?
Oregon, Penn State's the Big Ten title game. Indiana, look at 11-1. I know the schedule wasn't great, but they do have a win over Michigan, which means a little bit more today, I think. I mean, I think Indiana probably gets in at 11-1. And Ohio State, boy, your only loss before this was to the number one team in the country on the road at Oregon. Obviously, today is not a good loss, but you have the win over Penn State. You basically took care of business the rest of the way. I don't see them dropping from 2 to outside the top 12. I just don't. They're a legacy brand. They're like an Alabama or somebody who they get the TV ratings. Like I don't see that happening. I think they're in. But it's an interesting discussion, and I do think the SEC, just to bring the discussion back to LSU a little bit, it kind of cannibalized itself this year. You're going to get 3 teams in. The 4th is questionable, as we said. The couple of candidates for that last spot who could get in, but it's one of those years where there wasn't a dominant team, and everybody kind of picked up a loss or 2 here or there, and it just goes to show you for LSU how tight that margin for error is.
Yeah, you're gonna have to decide, I think, between a 2-loss Ohio State team that played kind of a soft schedule in the Big Ten versus a 3-loss SEC team like say South Carolina or say Alabama, who played a real murderer's row of opponents. That didn't mean that Ohio State didn't play some top teams. They played Oregon, they played Penn State, they played Indiana, but the rest of their schedule is not nearly as strong as an SEC schedule would be. So I think the committee, they looked at they really value if you have 1 loss or 2 loss. It doesn't really matter what conference you're in, as long as you're in a power conference. I think the committee is going to have you in. I don't think they look at a 3-loss team from the SEC and because the strength of schedule, weigh that against a 2-loss team from the Big Ten. I think they give the nod to the 2-loss team from the Big Ten just because they went out and they took care of business against their schedule. I don't think the committee really deals too much in hypotheticals like that. So yeah, I think that's where it shakes out. You probably need baseline, just like we thought going in. You probably need 10 wins to be comfortable with it. If you go to 9, then things start to get dicey, and that's the risk you play. We said that before the season. I think that's how it's playing out.
Yeah, I agree. I think 10 you're safe in the power conference, especially when we talk about power conference. We're talking SEC and Big Ten, because I don't know that Miami feels very good right now at 10-2. They may get left out in the cold. Iowa State is winning tonight. I think they're going to be 10-2, but if they don't win the Big 12, they're probably not it. I mean, 10 wins in the SEC or Big 10 gets you in. 9, you're going to need first of all, you're going to have played a very difficult schedule. You're going to have a scalp or 2 on the wall, like Alabama's got the win over Georgia. That certainly helps. Ole Miss has the win over Georgia as well. So those things help, but I don't. Boy, we'll see. It'll be interesting to see what happens, because I do think the strength of schedule matters, but I also think sometimes you just see the committee say, well, they were 10-2 and they were 9-3. We're going to take the 10-2 team. So I don't know. We'll see. From LSU's perspective, this is the LSU Sports Insider postgame show. I think we're going to wrap things up here. Reed, your final thoughts on LSU's 37-17 victory tonight. We got plenty of time to talk offseason and everything else, but just for tonight, I think a good way for LSU to end the season and get some of the sour taste out of its mouth.
Garrett Nussmeier was fantastic. I think before the injury and especially after the injury, he was great. It looked really dicey for him when he got hurt. You're thinking, like I said earlier, you're thinking separated shoulder, broken collarbone. So it was really encouraging to see him come out, shake off that injury, come back and play what might be his best game of the season. I think he played really well. It was also encouraging to see some young guys on defense step up. With Weeks, he'll be back next year, assuming he doesn't hit the portal. I'm not saying he will or won't, but you have to factor in that possibility nowadays. Devon Keys, 10 tackles, Dominic McKinley, 2 sacks. Those young guys on defense really stepped up, and they played well. That's an encouraging sign moving forward. And I think, we're Wilson, Koki, and I were looking at the senior day ceremony before the game, and they just kept bringing out defensive starter after defensive starter after defensive starter. And we looked at it, we're like, okay, we didn't really realize exactly how many starters they're losing on the defensive side of the ball. It was 8 starters on defense for all were honored
Wow.
seniors. That means they're either going to the draft or they're out of eligibility. So LSU's defense is going to look a lot different next year. You're probably going to have a combination of freshmen, guys who came back, and transfers to restock that defense. When you think about returners, you really got Weeks in the middle. You've got Devon Keys, like I mentioned. You've got Ashton Stamps on the outside, and that's really it. Like, you don't have a lot of returning production, so LSU's going to have to really hit the transfer portal hard. I think that's what Brian Kelly alluded to last week, and he'll have to rebuild the team that way. And then I think LSU is going to hope and pray that they get Garrett Nussmeier back, because if they don't get Garrett Nussmeier back, then you're going to have to devote a lot of your NIL money that should be going to the transfer portal. A quarterback's going to take up a large chunk of that, maybe even all of it. So that's going to leave them with fewer options on defense. So I think the most important thing is trying to get Garrett Nussmeier back. Then after that, you can go and sort of build out the rest of your roster through the transfer portal. That's going to be fascinating to see how they attack it this offseason.
No doubt about it. The offseason really doesn't ever sleep in college football these days, between recruiting signing day coming up on Wednesday, the transfer portal, the NIL situation, coaching hot season. Do you change coaching staffs, all those things, and then you get into spring practice and the spring transfer portal season. So the offseason never really ends, and we will be with you every step of the way here on the LSU Sports Insider. We have podcasts twice a week, every Monday and Thursday usually. Every now and then we'll switch it up, like for Thanksgiving week we switched it up. And we appreciate each and every one of you joining us. You can subscribe to the LSU Sports at NOLA.com YouTube channel. Click the bell for notifications, and you will get notified every time we go live. We've been with you on postgame shows pretty much the entire football season, and we will do so again next year, maybe even dip our toes into some postgame basketball or baseball as the season gets going too. So appreciate you all joining us. We're brought to you by Waste Pro. Our thanks to them. And we're going to sign off, and we'll see you Monday for the next LSU Sports Insider. For Reed Darcy, I'm Zach Ewing. LSU beats Oklahoma 37-17. Y'all have a good night.